Hello, and welcome to this edition of Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm New York State Senator Robert Jackson, representing the 31st Senatorial District of 13 miles of Manhattan from Marble Hill down to Chelsea, covering all of the areas you may want to live in, such as Inwood, Washington Heights, West Harlem, Upper West Side, Midtown, all the way down to Chelsea. But time and time again, I have expressed my belief that students should be in the classroom. And my hope for the upcoming school year is to have schools reopen for in-person learning. However, as we all adapt to the pandemic life of COVID-19 strains, they have adapted very well. No one opposes reopening schools in September, but we are still in a pandemic. And unlike other variants, Delta doesn't spare kids too young to be vaccinated. Families and educators, like many New Yorkers, are concerned, afraid, and scared. Today, we're joined by three expert panelists to focus on what's going back to school and the COVID-19 protocols, class size, testing, healing schools, and the expectations of parents and students. Three panelists is Dr. Kaliris Salas-Ramirez, a PhD, Distinguished Medical Lecturer, Department of Molecular, Cellular, and Biomedical Sciences at CUNY School of Medicine. Kim Watkins, public school parent, recently retired CEC president and founding members of Parents Supporting Parents New York. And Tajh Sutton, Teens Take Charge Program Director, Community Education Council District 14, president and steering committee member of Parents for Responsive, Equitable, Safe Schools. Welcome. Big question to you. Are we going to have remote learning in schools this year? Your opinion?
Are we going to? We don't know yet. Are we fighting for it? Hands down. Yeah. We think it's necessary for this year. For safety measures, it's one way to decrease class size in our classrooms so that we can adhere to mitigation factors and to non-pharmacological interventions in order to be safe in our schools.
Kim Watkins, you're president of CEC3, which is part of the Upper West Side and part of Harlem. And so, my bet is that even though the mayor is pushing for in-person learning and there's no other option, can you imagine if you were the chancellor or the mayor and said that there was no other option? I don't really believe that. I believe they have a backup plan. What do you believe?
Well, if they have a backup plan and they're holding those cards to their vest, they're playing really great poker because it's confusing and really frustrating to parents. I agree completely with Kaliris. And what I am hearing in District 3 and throughout the city is that, especially with parents that have kids who are immunocompromised, we have families in lots of parts of your district, Senator, and in my neighborhood at Harlem, where multiple generations of family members live in the same household, and where kids can bring the disease home with them. There are still significant concerns about the potential for the spread of COVID, especially the Delta variant, and that impacts future learning opportunities for the entire school system. So what we believed to be the case last year was that we would learn and adopt best practices from the remote experiences that we had, and that could become the model for the city to offer a remote learning for children, for families who really needed it. And the fact that we're a few days from opening the school system, and so many parents still really concerned about sending their kids in person, particularly those that are too young to be vaccinated. We're on the edge of our seats and really, really concerned.
Well, Tajh, you're Teens Take Charge Program Director and Parents for Responsive, Equitable, Safe Schools. What if the mayor does not go forward with a remote option? What are parents going to do? I heard this morning on the news that basically he's threatening to call ACS, the Agency for to Children's Services if in fact people really don't come to school. What's your thought about that and about, in my opinion, that's a threat, but what do you feel about that and what are we going to do about it?
It is a threat. And what's more, not offering a remote option in the first place without communicating with families, educators, and students. That was the initial threat, right, in May, because the remote learning option never should have been taken off the table in the first place when we live in a public school system where 60 to 70% of our families were still learning and working remotely as of June 2021. And for families, and parent leaders like us who live in predominantly communities of color, we already understand that ACS is often weaponized against mothers who are Black and Latino. So this threat from the mayor is completely unacceptable, especially when you think about the fact that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on Black and Latino families. How can you chastise and penalize Black and Latino mothers for trying to keep their families safe when you haven't provided the resources or the access for them to make healthy and informed decisions? The Department of Education should have spent this summer having conversations and holding space for vaccine hesitancy, having conversations that were culturally responsive about the virus, being honest and transparent about the fact that while we all want in-person learning to happening, there is some risk. And now there is even more risk for our children. So this idea that families are going to be penalized for striking, which is what we plan to do, absolutely, because the health mitigations are not up to par, shame on him. And I can't wait until he's no longer mayor.
Well, after they mentioned about the mayor, possibly calling ACS, the chancellor basically, in my opinion, clarified that as far as if there is, sort of like excessive abusive type situation, because that's, when ACS is called, you're negligent in your children's care or you're abusive, they take the kids away from you. But it seems as though that the chancellor had communicated, only in extreme cases, but if you keep your child out because you disagree with the fact that they don't have remote learning, then it's okay. In essence, she was not saying it's okay, but in essence, that's what I gather from that. But let me just say, class size has always played a role in improving education outcomes. But now with this pandemic, everyone talks about the needs for social distancing, and it seems more imperative now than ever. And as you know, the population of New York City has gone up from 8.6 million to 8.8 million. And so now there's more children going to be in school. So what do you think about the thoughts about social distancing and class size in the classroom?
Yeah, I do want to encourage, right before we jump into that, I do want to encourage any parent that is planning to not send their child in because of whatever reason, to make sure that they communicate with their school. That's your one protection. Make sure you send an email and say, I'm not sending my child in for XYZ, or my child will not be attending. The red flag is raised when they can't communicate with you at all. And so in order to protect yourself and your children, just make sure that you send an email to your principal, to your parent coordinator, to your teachers, and just let them know my child is not going to be coming in, so that we minimize any sort of assumption as to why your child is not in school. In terms of social distancing, I think that the CDC was a little bit, jumping the gun when they decided that we did not need to adhere to the 3 feet social distancing in our schools and the 6 feet social distancing when children are eating. And we've learned that now, right? As we're seeing more and more districts, full districts close down because of the spread of COVID. And so, Taj and I have engaged in conversations with the directors of the Situation Room from the Department of Education and talked about this, that last year in the fall, the Department of Education felt like it was being conservative in terms of the decisions that they were making. And as a health professional, I would say that we need to continue to be conservative. Back then, yes, we made these assumptions in terms of what we could do in schools based on pre-Delta, but now Delta is presenting us with a completely different scenario, in addition to the fact that we are seeing additional variants of the COVID virus. come into our communities that we don't know how it's going to affect our children. The fact is the COVID virus is spread airborne. The further apart that we are, the safer we are. So we need to not just ensure that we have social distancing in terms of adhering to the 3 feet, but also making sure that we have quality masks for teachers and students in order to be able to protect themselves. The surgical masks are not enough anymore. So if we are going to have surgical masks in schools, we need to double mask. But we also need to request and make sure that we have KN95s and KN94s in schools for both students and teachers. The cloth mask isn't enough either. And we also need to make sure that it is tight around the face to make sure that there's no opening for those particles to go into and affect children. We're seeing too many breakthrough cases in vaccinated people. New Jersey has up to 20% of breakthrough cases in the state. And so we're seeing the same trends here in New York. We're seeing too many kids. And as Tajh has highlighted, we're seeing too many Black and Latino kids being dramatically impacted directly, being the most children hospitalized because of COVID. And we need to protect our communities.
Thank you. So Kim,
Yeah.
I've heard that there's a petition out there that thousands of parents and other adults are calling for remote learning. Where is this petition at now? How many signatures, if you know, we have? And there are reports that parents are eager to get their children back to school in person, but they want to know what do they see in returning schools and how the mayor, putting pressure on the mayor to have him backtrack or to realize that parents are actively involved in their children's education and they want the option of remote learning. So how many signatures we have, Kim, if you know, and where are we going with this?
I got to be honest. I have seen so many versions of the petitions and signed so many of them myself. I don't actually know what the number is up to right now, but I was happy to see that yesterday the Manhattan Borough President joined the public advocate, Jumaane Williams, Gail Brewer and Jumaane Williams, and some others at City Hall to call on the mayor for the remote option. But of course, here it's Thursday. The weekend is here. The first day of school, the 13th, is days away. And so as we started this conversation with the potential that something is maybe in development, but that is just not being communicated yet, makes for a really high stress environment for teachers, for families, and of course for our students. And I find that incredibly frustrating to get this close. But I also want to point out and recognize that the remote option is vital for the sustainability of the school system moving forward in the years to come. If we are running a smart school system, we are working on how we optimize digital learning and making sure that we have equity in terms of access to high-speed internet, equity in terms of devices, that we're being smart about making sure that that priority it remains a focus of each of our schools and our districts and the system itself. I'm also incredibly concerned that we will see, as other school systems around the country saw, kids go into the buildings within days, within the first week, the school systems shut down and had to go to remote learning. So we could be in a position at this point next week where we're talking about multiple schools, maybe multiple districts, maybe the whole system having to resort to remote learning because we are taking such risks by having overcrowded schools. Very few. I just today realized from a call from one of the nursing supervisors that we have 390 nurse vacancies right now in our school system of 1,800 schools, which means we don't have healthcare providers in our school buildings to help determine what exactly is going on when individual cases take place inside the school day. So there's a lot still to cover between now and Monday.
Members of the State Senate and State Assembly, we have already signed a letter, about 25 of us, indicating remote learning should be an option for parents to have. What are you hearing out there as far as numbers of signatures, as far as city council members and other legislators are on board trying to communicate loud and clear to the mayor and to the governor that remote learning should be an option. Taj.
Yeah, I have all this data in my head because I'm so invested in remote. So as of right now, the Restore Remote petition, which I authored, has over 6,000 signatures. And that petition speaks to a lot of the things Kim mentioned. It's asking not just for a remote option that we can throw at parents and not do successfully, but it's asking for those quality devices. Is demanding free broadband access, not only in our public school families' homes, but also in the shelters that thousands of our New York City public school children live in, right? It's asking for language access, because even if you provide a family with a device and Wi-Fi, if the family does not speak English at home, then you're putting parents and caregivers in a very tough spot in terms of supporting their children with the virtual learning, right? And we're also asking that communication and transparency really be expanded so that families understand, right? We had families who didn't get devices for 6 months, but the Department of Education is acting as though it did this wonderful thing by providing these Chromebooks that actually wound up not being the best option for many families, particularly our older students in middle and high school that have to write short answer and essays and had to do that without keyboards, right? So when we are talking about a remote option, we are also talking about the resources necessary to make that remote option successful, because we understand that two things can be true at the same time. And we know that every family did not have a positive experience of remote option. But the main point behind our fighting for this remote option is that it's going to keep those class sizes small, and it's going to keep our in-person learners safe. It does not make sense to introduce 1.4 million students and hundreds of thousands of staff members into school buildings that we knew were overcrowded before the pandemic, with the Delta variant raging and impacting our children. I also just want to draw attention to the petition for school safety walkout, which specifically talks about vaccine mandates, masking mandates, ventilation upgrades, and the safety precautions necessary to keep our schools open. And then third, actually, our administrators came together recently and created a petition specifically around increased COVID testing in our schools. Because if we are testing at 10%, which is the current DOE policy, we have no way of knowing what's really going on health-wise with our children and the faculty. And we also have no way of stopping the spread, right? So those petitions have really actually been integral in applying pressure and creating the conditions for senators and representatives like yourself to create those letters and to help us push. And so we're super appreciative of that. And I think it was actually 28 senators. And we were very happy to see that open letter because we all really need to be working
senators
together.
and assembly members.
Yes, exactly. It's been wonderful to have the support of the public advocate, of yourself, of the education chair, Mark Traeger, of Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, and also, he couldn't be there yesterday, but Queensborough President Donovan Richards as well. We're hoping, right, that it makes the mayor understand, it's not 1 or 2 or 10 parents and families and teachers. There are thousands of individuals in New York City who are invested in public education, saying that this is essential and that this will save lives.
Thank you. So Dr. Salas-Ramirez, what is it about? Do you think it's about they don't have enough money? I mean, the foundation aid of $4.2 billion over 3 years, along with the federal money. So it cannot be, in my opinion, about money. So what is it about then? You have any idea why the mayor is being so, what we would call hard-headed, a knucklehead in this situation? You know what I mean? Let's call it like it is. I mean, he thinks that he can just, sham this down the throat of parents and educators that feel that remote learning should be part of the solution. We passed up in Albany when the governor called an emergency session. Obviously, we extended the rent moratorium, right, to January 15th. But also, the open meetings law said you have to have open meetings. And so you're going to have some community boards and others in person and remote from a virtual point of view, a combination of both. How come they can't take that into consideration?
My thought hasn't changed in the last couple of years of our mayor, because yes, he's absolutely incredibly stubborn. And so, it's this narrative of, I opened the largest school system in the country. It's definitely not that we don't have the money. I'm president of CEC4, and last night we passed a resolution, not just in support of the remote option, but also to increase testing. My principal drafted an opinion piece that was published yesterday morning in the Daily News to ask for increased testing. And, you know, with our math, we're literally looking at maybe like one student per school that we're actually testing with this 10% biweekly model. FEMA will actually pay for all of the testing. That money does not have to come from the city at all. So we could literally be testing 100% of our students, 100% of our staff, independent of vaccine status. That money is not coming out of our pockets. In addition to, as you stated, we have a lot of stimulus money that's coming in. Senator Schumer, my understanding, has just promised to make sure that if we have a remote option, that will also be supported. We also saw that guidance through the New York State Department of Education. They released a guidance about 3 weeks ago, and they said any school district that wants to support a remote option, we will provide them with funding. So there's zero reason for any of this, except for he wants to leave his tenure, saying, I open the school system. I also want to highlight that during Summer Rising, in Summer Rising, we roughly had 200,000 students in schools, roughly about 80,000 staff. It was about 2 months of instruction. During that time, we had 2 formal school closures. There were several schools that were also closed for investigations. In that, we had a total of over 1,000 classrooms closed. And so we're talking of just a portion of our population in school buildings. That's what resulted over the summer. What do we think will happen when we have over 1 million people in these school buildings that are traveling in public transportation, that live in multi-generational homes, that are coming from unstable housing, that need support systems? We're doing nothing also in order to educate our communities in terms of how to protect yourself. So communities are coming together and are thinking about how are we going to have pop-up testing sites, particularly for students that are from 3K to 8th grade, right? How are we going to make sure, what is the inequity in terms of, now there's a policy for middle school and high school that if you are vaccinated, you can stay in your classroom and receive in-person instruction. What's going to happen with these kids that are going to have to quarantine? Is the instruction going to look different? Who's going to provide them with the instruction? Guess what? It's an office hours model where they're not obligated to provide them with instruction. So if we continue, if we're really talking about equity and we're really talking about tackling the tale of 2 cities, unfortunately, our mayor has not addressed any of that.
So Kim, you know what some of the buildings look like. Some buildings are very old and others may have windows that don't open completely. What's your opinion about the fact that we have so many buildings that are old and the ventilation is not appropriate? And from a capital point of view, we're talking about probably hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to get all of our schools in shape.
New York City has many buildings that are 100 years old and some, and the infrastructure maintenance, maintaining our infrastructure has been a headache for those of us that have worked with and in among these buildings for many years. There are buildings in District 3 that have had scaffolding up because of roofing work that led to asbestos discovery, that led to additional infrastructural capital, like significant changes from the period of time that my daughter started kindergarten and she's going into 7th grade, and scaffolding is still up because the projects are still going on. Literally, it takes that long to get something done. And as it pertains to this particular year and the acute need for mobile ventilation systems and all of the cleaning supplies and operational windows and as many air conditioning units as can be installed at this point, I think it is a huge undertaking. I think that the DOE has tackled it, at least with some level of interest in doing as much as they could, with the immediate knowledge that the greater infrastructural change would take many, many years based on the way that capital monies flow and the way that projects are prioritized and handled. But I think that just underscores all the rest of this conversation about the need for remote options, the need for flexibility within the modeling of educating our kids, right? The essence of what we should be doing is focusing on what our kids need and how to best serve them, to best educate them and prepare them. And if teaching them through a computer at home is the best way because in person is physically is too risky, then we should be exploring that. We should be making a commitment to that, so that the ability to handle the physical, the face-to-face and physical existence within the school walls is not such an impediment or such a high risk.
This is about, in my opinion, organizing. We have Eric Adams that will be more than likely be coming in as the mayor. You have a new borough president in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is the largest borough out of the entire city, over 3 million people. What are we doing from the parents' point of view, from a legislative point of view, or the leaders that are going to be taking over in January and organizing? What are they saying, and what are parents doing, and the leadership under Teens Take Charge, and as parents of responsive, equitable, safe schools? What are we doing in order to make it happen?
I think a lot of what we're doing is helping to educate and inform our communities and give them spaces where they can just learn about the issues. Something that parents and educators have been complaining about and asking to be improved even outside of the health specifications of the buildings themselves has been communication and transparency from the Department of Education. And because we aren't getting that, CEC presidents like ourselves, we take it upon ourselves to hold space, to have meetings, to organize info sessions, and have the community write resolutions with us so that we're getting every single family's circumstances, and then that's impacting how we advocate as parent leaders. And we really wish that was happening at the Department of Education level, because what we've experienced thus far, and I think Kim and Kaliris can attest to this as well, is there's a tokenization of families that takes place. And so as opposed to active listening and engagement that will impact action and policy, what we're often met with is, yeah, we had a meeting about that, didn't we? Without actually seeing a change implemented.
So in my opinion, I would say that when you see your elected public officials outside, go up to them, tell them how you, ask them what is their position. So for example, and let me be straightforward, Eric Adams is our incoming mayor, in my opinion, but he's the current borough president of Brooklyn. Has he taken a position on this? Has other borough presidents taken a position? That's important. So continue to organize like you're doing, all three of you on the ground. I'm proud of all of you. You need to be proud of yourself. And I know many other people are very proud of you. And I really want to thank you on behalf of all the residents of New York City. We really appreciate your time, insight, dedication to the cause of public education. And also I want to thank everyone for watching Represent NYC.